Hello, folks. I'm here today for our. It likes to do that to me. Oh, that's right. I've got a YouTube open again. Hello. All right. I have to remember to not do that again. I keep on doing that. It's still back there. All right. Now I have an excuse to edit this later. All right. Back here today for the fourth in this series on platform thinking. Today we have my good friend Joao here to talk to us about what he thinks a platform is, how we might think through a platform with DDD, domain-driven design, how we might think about organizational structures, cognitive load, flow, team topologies, ideas around platforming, which I think will be a great conversation. And then one that I'm really super interested in, which is how do platforms evolve and respond to environmental pressures, and how should we think about that a little bit? So, Joao, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah. Hi, Jabe. Thanks for the invite to be in the podcast, and for everyone at home, if it is evening, like here on this side of the pond, or afternoon on your side. Well, my name is João. I'm Portuguese, but I live in the Netherlands, and I'm an independent consultant. So I support and enable organizations to evolve their operating model, especially when they want to put software at the center at their business. So I work with more traditional organizations, and well, workshops and conferences and stuff like that. But mainly I do this for a living.
Cool. So, there seems to be, when I talk to everybody about platforms these days, there seems to be kind of a wide variety of definitions. I don't necessarily think that's good or bad, but I usually like to start these conversations just like with some level setting for everybody who's watching based on the speaker. So like, what do you think a platform is? How should we think about it, at least for this conversation? What's a platform?
Which is a great question, right? So I like to go to the original definition, right? A platform is something that elevates so we can stand, which is a good concept to start with. So I like to think when we bring these to our space, and our space is, well, IT people, that part of our work is novel, but part of our work is very repetitive, and we already discovered the patterns. I like to see the platforms to encapsulate these patterns, offer these patterns to a wider audience. Therefore, we can get closer to our goal, or therefore we can focus on these novel parts of doing software. I like to think about that. So I really like to think about these patterns. And that is for me what a platform is. And there are some aspects of our work on the IT world with software that some patterns are more obvious. And then there are other patterns that are a bit more industry specific. Which makes the journey of designing platforms very interesting.
Right. So you mean there's some general platforms, general principles for like all platforms, but then there's maybe some more specific ones for IT platforms. Is that roughly what you mean? Or do you mean there's more specific ones based on verticals like banks and healthcare?
Yeah. So the latter. I will say that today we already discover. Well, some companies are still discovering, but well, to put software in production, we need some patterns, right? You need to build code and test code and store artifacts and vulnerabilities and all of that type of stuff. So all of those patterns have already been discussed and discovered, and tooling exists around that, although lots of companies are still discovering them. So there are some obvious platforms around these patterns and these concepts, right? But then there are very specific ones, and I like that you mentioned, for instance, banking. Banking needs to do reporting. So US standard FATCA, right, from US citizens that are across the world that needs to pay taxes to US authorities. needs to be reported on. So there is a standard. So we can build a platform about that because the bank has different business operations, whatever models the bank has, but then needs to go towards this standard to go outside of the bank. We can build a platform, if we look internally, to offer people an interface. Look, you play with your data, you have whatever tools to have your core banking systems, but I offer you a platform that you just put the data, and I handle these with the central banks, with the tax authorities, whatever, to make our life easier. And this is one of the examples where the folks can be focused on their banking products. It is price, quality of service, whatever makes the business quality. But then this regulatory aspect is handled for you and can work at scale, right? Because for you to have a banking license, you need to play by the rules. And let's imagine that everyone plays by the same rules. But the platform can help there. So different verticals or sectors can then have specific platforms.
Cool. Yeah, one of the things you mentioned reminds me of, so there's this Nobel Prize winning economist. His name is Herbert Simon. He taught at CMU, where I'm working on my PhD. And he wrote this book, it's called The Sciences of the Artificial. And it's roughly a book about design, like creating artificial systems. So basically he describes artificial systems as things that humans create, right? Like they're not natural systems, not trees, they're software, for instance. And one of his arguments that I love in that book, well, first of all, he came up with the term. He's famous for this. One of the things he's famous for is this idea called componentization, and it's actually like this insight into the idea that organizations have to be componentized. It wasn't actually started from software components, although it goes there eventually. It started as when you look at the structure of organizations, they have to be componentized in order to kind of like be able to handle a certain amount of complexity. You have to have people be able to focus on different parts of the systems. And then the interesting thing, both from a computational perspective and from an organizational perspective, is he argues, similar to what you just said, that design is concerned primarily with interfaces. That's its primary concern, is the way that components interface with each other. That is the design question for him. So, keeping in mind this like idea that there's this weird, well, I mean, frankly, like it's Conway's law before Conway describes Conway's law in a lot of ways. There's this weird way in which the software is componentized and this weird way that organizations are componentized. And there's this commonality of interface design, right? How should we think about organizational design, cognitive load, being able to focus on things in these complex environments, and specifically, like, how does a platform help us think about that or help us execute that? How does a platform restructure the organization? Things like that.
I think these are great questions, right? So I lost a bit of the beginning. There was something, but I understood the final part about components.
Yeah.
And I think that this is where it starts, understanding the purpose of these components. We need to understand the whole. But for instance, I'm going to give an example. I worked for a long time with a telco nearby in Belgium. So for the people outside of Europe, we are very small. I live in the Netherlands. I'm 1 hour away from Germany and 1 hour away from Belgium. So just to give context, we are flat. We have good highways. This is the context, okay? This is a very small country. So work with this telco that wants to change their operating model. And one of the things that we discuss is how legal could operate. And I told them legal have their own flows of value, right? Because you need to do lobbying, because you need not in the sense of lobbying being doing in the US, but how the law is going to change. And this is very important because they need to talk with lawmakers and policymakers, but needs to understand what happens in regulation to feed this into the organization. How are we going to organize ourselves? How are we going to communicate? Because if we are doing migration to the cloud and somehow the interface with police is going to change, or the regulations about, intercepting calls and all of these, they can take the license. How are we going to operate and do this? And this was a fundamental question when I was supporting the organization to redesign. Where are these, we call horizontals? What are these platforms that offer these common services to the organization and even influence how the software can be made? Because they use the term Chinese walls, right? Because of the Great Wall of China. How are we going to separate these? And it's looking to these fundamental questions, how your business is built on, and what are these interfaces? What are the things that you can control? You can control the prices of your products. And what are the things that you need to play by the rules because there is someone regulating you? And this was fundamental to this part of the organizational design and what you were saying about different components. Because then also we did a very interesting thing, talking about Conway's Law. It's the first organization that I know at this scale killing business and IT. We finally organized per capability. Thinking about, okay, we need a fulfillment capability. So self-fulfillment and premium, and then we need order management systems. We need BSS and OSS layers. Okay, these people are together to fulfill this capability. What are the interfaces to the other parts of the value chain? What are the interfaces internally between these folks building software and maintaining systems and folks figuring out operational processes? So then we have this, fractal pattern of platforms inside of platforms. But this is another lens that I also take. Okay, capabilities belong together, because our problem with software is that we think that software is that special thing that we put apart, but no, software exists to power a capability that already existed, done by other means. I just finished reading that book on the top, Good Services, that talks about this, that services evolve over channels, was door-to-door and via mail and then fax, and now it's over the internet. It's powered by software. Let's think about this. It's just another medium, although artificial. It's just another medium to realize a capability. And I think that if we go there, we can start discovering the boundaries, not copying the boundaries, because sending something by mail, it's different than a form online, but rethinking where these boundaries are to offer a good service or have a good communication, a good interface. And I think that if we start thinking in these terms, and it took me a long while to thinking about these terms, then organizational design can be a little bit different, because then we can think about these, and then we can factor in, as you said, Dunbar's number. For those like me that believes on this theory, that the relationships that we can maintain in our brain and the trust cycles, this also can help to challenge the components, because if we have more than 150 people managing some capabilities that belong together, and now we need to add more people, also is a signal to reason all of these capabilities now as these strong forces to each other, or are the forces weaker, therefore they can be more far away from each other, right? Like you start your business B2C in a telco, and then you want to go to B2B. Although it's selling something, it's selling your 5G and your broadband and whatever, your way that you do sales is totally different. Although you have a sales capability, it's totally different. So split these. Let these evolve separately. Discover what is common. Well, monitoring the network is common. Doesn't matter how you sell those services. And are those, I'm trying to use this example to show how can we think about these components and these boundaries and ask these questions. And Dunbar's number is a good one, because if this grows out of control, then, the quality of capability can drop.
Yeah.
And the last goes to cognitive load, right? The John Sweller, that is a nice one also to go. Cognitive load theory, that in this case, team topologies put these on the front line for IT people for our industry, right? We have three types of cognitive load: intrinsic, extraneous, or germane, right? And we have our limitations of our brain, as powerful as it can be. How platforms can help reduce the extraneous type of cognitive load and help other teams focus on germane, what is from domain. That is a discussion that I don't see a lot, or better saying, I start to see now due to the effect of team topologies, right? People really resonate what is there. And then, okay, let's talk about team topologies. Okay, let's talk about these concepts on your organization. I think that is a good unblocker. And I really like that you start a podcast on this, because I'm going to rant. Lots of people like team topologies because they want a platform. Oh, I have a platform. What does the platform does? Everything that other people don't like to do. Right. So I think that you are doing the good work and asking what are the heuristics that we have and the patterns that we see to design better platforms.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, so like the cognitive load thing, to me, like I had this, my preferred term for it is cognitive engineering. I think cognitive load is a good description of a negative pattern, right? Like too much cognitive load causes things to go wrong. But as a designer, I actually like to point out to people that what you want to do is engineer people's cognition, by which I mean you want people to pay attention to certain things and not have to pay attention to other things. So you're actually increasing their cognitive load around certain things. That's what paying attention means. And you're lowering it around other things. So it's like a design decision, right? It's not that you're trying to lower all the cognitive load. You lower everyone's cognitive load to zero, nobody's doing any thinking. That seems like a bad idea too, right? So
AI for you.
So I think like, you know, the classic one from like the Kevin community would be the description of like a roundabout. Why is a roundabout safe? It doesn't lower your cognitive load, right? Like the argument is that, like for instance, a red light lowers your cognitive load and is more dangerous because people think if the light's red or green, I don't have to look. If it's green, I drive through. And they don't bother to look, and that's how you get people T-boned, right? Because they think that the light is telling them the truth. They don't have to actually pay attention to the environment. The beauty of a traffic circle is that every driver approaching a traffic circle knows that they need to pay attention. And so it heightens their cognitive load, and it brings their attention to the local agents that are in play, so that they're actually highly focused on orchestrating a pattern with other agents at the time. And that seems to be safer for a lot of reasons. So, but the other thing about like when you were talking about cognitive load, because it's this story. I believe Ron Jeffries was the one who told me this story. So the story is roughly he's talking about working with Kent Beck at Ford, early XP projects, and he was talking about like code formatting. And he was saying that Kent was very strict about the code formatting, and that initially he couldn't really like get it. Like, why are we being so pedantic about the code formatting? And so he talked to Kent, and Kent said, if you format the code the way that I'm instructing you to, and you'll only be able to put so much code on the screen. And you will make methods that are more intelligible to you. Basically, it's cognitive engineering activity. It's making the methods things that can actually be reasoned about, right? So again, it's a kind of componentization issue. It's a cognitive load issue. It's kind of interesting. And so, to me, the interesting thing about platforms and about like Dunbar's number and team structures and stuff like that is that we're basically saying, what if we take this idea about a single engineer interacting with a system that we call a code base, and we blow it up and ask a question about how would we format the code metaphorically to fit within a team structure as opposed to just an individual structure. And so then you get some really interesting questions about like how much complexity can any particular component in a system hold and still be productive and written out by a team. And then the secondary question, of course, which is how do we interface with other components, since the components can't be infinitely big anymore? They have to be the right size and stuff like that. So when you work with teams around this idea of cognitive load, like what are some patterns that you use to kind of think about or describe solving for cognitive load or working with cognitive load?
Yeah, so there are a couple of here, and this is a very interesting question, right? So let's say that the team measured the throughput, right? Where, based on the way that they do tasks, they know more or less what is going on. And if they track this across time, if you see the throughput going down, something goes on. Well, someone is sick with long-term diseases, for instance, or something is happening. Is domain that changed, right? Company was operating in Europe and now decided to operate in US and Singapore. Laws are totally different, right? What is there to see? So the throughput can be one if the teams do. Another ones are signals that you can take from production, for instance. Are the bugs going, if there are sound engineering practices, but even though the bugs are going up to the roof for levels that are not normal. So if we apply the SRE practices, a team that was always under the error budget suddenly is consistently above. What is there that we need to look? Did something change in the environment that now the cognitive load is going up, right? Did we lose someone on the team and we made a assumption about the knowledge, and actually it was institutional knowledge that went out of the door? So all of these questions, if some people in the organization are supporting, are enabling, are these type of questions that we can ask. And then, yes, we can go to cognitive engineering. How can we put these patterns constraining some pathways of communication that allows this to be at stable environments and stable for both parties, for people not to go burnout, and also for the system, so the company makes money and is competitive in the market, right? Because this is the other thing. If the system, I think that, is bad, not to use a bad word, if the system is bad, you will not have customers, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the signals that I can be used, and I use to help out teams and challenge teams to use to navigate this area.
Yeah. So I think there's the two things that you said there that are particularly interesting to me. Like the first one, comes from like my experience helping organizations redesign the organizational structure, which I think you were talking about a little bit in this way, which is like, do we optimize for locality? So in a global organization, that's a question about do we organize around regions, EMEA, North America, ASPAC, like do we organize around these regional areas? Do we organize around a country-based system? Like where, do we do that? Or do we organize around functions at a global level? Like we have a global CRM system, we have a global ERP system, things like that. And that's a really hard question for a lot of organizations to answer. It does seem to me like a lot of organizations taking a value stream approach these days are figuring out that functionalization, like functional silos, tends to be a dysfunction. Like they tend to not work out very well. So you get these kind of cross-cutting concerns. So like, I wonder about like how to think about the trade-off between having like a highly efficient global structure versus a more disparate or heterogeneous implementation at a at a locality level. And I wonder if that has something to do with maybe like the right level of kind of composability of the platform, so that you could have a mix of like custom pieces and common pieces. Like, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this kind of local versus global view of organizing and how it's related to the platform architectures?
I'm going to use different words because you trigger me.
Sure.
I have a social campaign to go tomorrow with starting with a quote from the Good Services book, that is, services should be coherent, not uniform. And this has deep stuff that goes to locality and global. And then I'm going to use an example of our former customers, because unfortunately, in software land, we just think about uniformity. Everything needs to look alike, and then the organization needs to look alike. Therefore, we have functions. Now, the example that I'm going to give is that use both patterns. Literally, so the example that I'm going to give, it's an organization, a global organization that does second-hand cars, right? And they acquire cars. They are also help the car dealers to sell the cars through the platform. But when they acquire cars, means that they have their own infrastructure. So they have ERPs and they have CRMs. The ERP platform is global. Why? Because the company also run their operations. Their shops, across the countries, across the world. They have on all continents. So the ERP, it's a global one. You don't want deviation there, because a car, it's a car that has a body and then has an engine. And in car manufacturing, today we have little differences, and it's about the bodywork. When a car manufacturer does an engine, worldwide, period, right? So global. But then when I was consulting with them, they had problems with their finance part, because how they did money is that they pick the pool of money and they lend the money both to the dealers and to the consumers. So they had a C2B2C type of business. And then here is where locality needs to play in. Why? Some countries, they act like a credit institution. They have a license, but the rules in India are different from the rules in Portugal, that are different the rules in Turkey. So you need locality there, although you are a credit institution there. But other countries where you don't have a credit license, you need to operate as a credit broker. So less control about what you do. You don't have the risk because you transfer the risk, all of this type of stuff. In terms of platform, they were just trying to build one platform, but they were trying not going to your concept of locality. So I helped them out. First of all, are you a credit institution or are you a broker? Well, both. And when you are a credit institution, it's even worse, because the rules are different. You need to have separate teams handling these. Therefore, in the beginning of the journey, you have global, and then you have local capabilities. And then towards the end, delivery a car and knowing where that resource is becomes global again. And this type of thinking. What is in our business that it's equal across the world, and what is so unique that needs to be local, and we just need to forget about uniformity, because it's just those teams had so much cognitive load because the backlog was gigantic, and these people cannot do anything. Well, they can't, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen the same type of thing where it becomes like both the cognitive load and then also eventually the code becomes impossible to manage, because it's one team trying to have like a bazillion switch statements and if statements to reconfigure for particular institutions, and it just becomes like a mired problem. And then the other version of it that I've seen, so like, my favorite version of this is I worked with this company that built conveyor belts, and the conveyor belts moved books and things around, and so each one was different lengths and had different like ways of moving the books up and down and stuff like that, and different numbers of floors. And so they would custom write the software for each one. So you can imagine they had like hundreds and hundreds of these conveyor belts, all with different versions of software, no way of upgrading anything. And when they found a defect in one system, it would take them a very long time to determine whether the defect was in every other system, because they had gone to full locality. Everything was a unique instance. Anyway, this is just an interesting example of that same type of thing. Like going local is causing a lot of too much fractality, and going global is enforcing too much overhead, I think. So I think your example was really interesting. Is like it's a context dependent question in a way.
It is, but this is what the podcast is about, right? What are the patterns? And by using these real life examples from your experience, from my experience, I hope that the folks at home or on the other side of the line pick up these patterns.
Yeah.
What I also feel is that more and more C-levels start to be sensible to this. Another rant, so you can put special music about the ranting of the guests.
Awesome.
I think that they finally figured out that just copying the model that the big consultancy firms bring doesn't work, because we need to have time to put some tools and to ask these hard questions and to map and support people in design to figure out, do we want to go local or do we want to go global? You might want to go global for regulation reasons, talking about banking. I don't want every team in the bank reporting something that is enforced by the regulators. We want to have a global function for that. It's cost effective and there is nothing new there, right? If we think about Worley, just a standard, put that out. Nothing new here. We don't do money. Go out.
Yeah.
And I feel, and talking with C-level that start to be with this, I feel that this generation that is 40 years old are more attuned with even the concepts of complexity, right? And more not seeing software as a software factory. Oh, we just, you put a pig and then you have a bunch of sausages. Nope.
Yep.
Doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Just because you've mentioned a couple times the Good Services book, so I think it's an interesting thing about platforms that I've tried to describe a couple times. So I have two different things that I would say about it. One is service design is confusing, just like platforms are confusing, because it's used in different ways in different places, right? So you could have service design as in ITIL, ITSM service design, like designing of services in a service catalog, right? Like, and from their kind of ITIL perspective, service is primarily a question of risk, right? Like who holds the risk for executing against a specific, service level agreement, who's in control of what the functionality does in order to deliver that SLA, things like that. It's really kind of an interesting subset, right? And then I think the other kind of IT native one is maybe like service-oriented architectures, microservice architecture. So like service design as in like this kind of componentization, this deployment pattern, this way of working. That's a kind of another form of service design in my mind. And then I think in the book that you're referring to, there's this designerly service design, which is more like some of the qualities that I tend to point out to people about service design from design perspective. It's like co-creation of value, deferral of particular configurations, offering up various products that can be configured in the field in order to create a local value system. The one I tend to use a lot because people kind of get it is like Starbucks is service designed. There's an experience you're having in there where you co-create the value, because like if you walk in and the barista asks you what you want and you just say, give me black coffee, you're not really having a Starbucks experience, right? Like you're supposed to like play this game with the bartender and you're supposed to assemble your own meal out of the pieces and components that are there and have this barista experience. And if you don't do that, you aren't having a Starbucks experience. So how should we think about services in platforms. I had this like theory that there's actually two big movements right now in the kind of organization of IT and how it's moving. There's this idea of moving from projects to products, right? So like moving from short-term funding, short-lived teams to long-term funding, long-lived teams, with this recognition, as you pointed out, like recognizing the complexity of products, recognizing the evolvability of products and the way they change, and having a team that's not trying to produce a final version. Like there's no shrink wrapping anymore. And then there's this other movement to me, which is this movement from like service to platform. And what I mean is that like, I don't think a service catalog is a platform. I think a platform has something to do with like configuring services in reasonably opinionated ways and allowing people to maybe reconstruct or reconfigure certain things. But there's more of a focus on the way that the services fit together as opposed to just offering individual services maintained by individual teams, right? It's the way that the capabilities interact that suddenly becomes a focus when you think about platforms to me. It's not just the availability of the service. So I don't know what based on the book that you seem excited about, does that make sense? Are there any other kind of thoughts that kind of spurs for you?
It makes sense, right? And they were focused on the service from the end user perspective, because Lou worked head of digital services for UK government when UK government was doing really cool stuff. So he's from that perspective. Okay, you have several channels, you just don't carry over the same experience. And then doesn't call capabilities, but it's about these services that glue stuff together, because a user wants to do something, doesn't care about your service, doesn't care about your component.
That's right.
Usually under stress situations.
Yeah.
You want to call help, or, I did systems for welfare, but not under, there was kids under stress, but not as a first responder type of system, right? Mm-hmm. So it's from this perspective. So I take the book and I really like it because starts to look to the whole, not just for the parts. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things. But then crosses. The explanation about Conway's law and bleeding your internal organization details, just perfect. And I like, because it's way better framed than what we try to do with IT folks. I really recommend.
Yeah.
And this is one aspect. I think that as an industry, we start to get more and more towards looking to have this holistic view, because we really find, okay, we are all connected. I consume some sources and someone consumes data from me. And finally, we start to understanding that. Now, inside of our industry, I didn't have the time to analyze as you did. But today, I agree with you. I don't know, but we're going to be together in a couple of weeks. Maybe we're going to disagree. But I agree with you, especially with these movements of the catalog that you offer with ITIL services. If we look to the developer experiences platforms for bigger organizations, I think that was Shopify that open sourced their developer experience platform. It's not about offering services. Is this your developer experience? This is how you can configure and go out. The same about this organization that I was talking, the second-hand cars. Their platform team did an awesome job self-serving people to spin environments and to kill environments, and they automatically put the bill. You add your bill in real time. You could add more components. You could more components to be cheaper. You could compose, but this is your developer experience. You know what you need. We make sure that the guardrails are here, that data is segregated, and, we mask the customer data so you can play around, but without knowing customer. So we put this for you, but you know what your goal. Well, by the way, this has a cost. This is what is costing for your team. And this is another example that I think that fits in category of, can I do backups? can I have, a load balancer? Can I have to? No, you want to test your software, take an environment, and here is the build, right?
Yep.
And which I think that we need both. I think that we need these both movements, the projects to products, because this is the most visible that is affecting the cognitive load of people.
Yep.
I'm currently working with 2 institutions in UK that one of them already figured it out, it's a regulator, really figured out their domains because they need to be a platform for society, because we don't want pensions to disappear, and work as a watchdog over the people offering that. So they figured out that. They are not figuring out the platforms part. They still have this mindset, using your terminology, of the ITIL services, because the question that they had, these people operate software and do the backups, but they also configure the laptops.
That's right, yeah.
It's for 2 different personas.
That's right, yeah.
2 different types of personas. Every user inside of your organizations versus the software that needs backups and redundancy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's right. Project to product. There is a book about that.
Yep.
That is getting there.
Yep.
The other one, there is nothing, at least on, or at least a resource that I can pick up. Okay, here are some patterns and heuristics that I can pick up. Maybe you are on that.
Yes, working on it. Yeah.
But we need also to have that, because then is this construction based on your value streams, and now you can evolve and pick up these capabilities to be proper capabilities, not a bunch of services glued together.
Yeah. I mean, so like one of the things that I try to let me see if I can make this make sense. One of the things I talk about sometimes with large global organizations is this very simple question which is, are you a holding company or are you a whole company? So you've done a lot of acquisitions, and there's 2 ways you can think about those acquisitions. One is that the value of each acquisition is independent, and you hold all of the acquisitions as a portfolio. So you just have a bunch of products, and that's fine. And in theory, if you kind of independently improve each product, maybe you get some good things to come out of it, or you get some more profit. And there's lots of reasons large global organizations like that. One of the reasons is that like the people who are acquired like to retain control of the thing that was acquired. They don't like to give up their thing. But anyway, the other version of it is to say like, what if you thought of your customer's life cycle? So like, all of your products are probably related in some way, and probably your customers go from one product to another product to another product. You have a brand. That's why they stay with you in a way. But what's it like for them if they go from one product to another product to another product, and each time they move, it's a completely different experience? They have to re-register. It appears that your company has never heard of them before because they're using a new product. What would it be more valuable if you considered your products in a life cycle that you could help explain to your customers, like, you're using this product, here's other products that would work. If you go to that other product along in your life cycle, it will know who you are already. It will know that you're already using these other products. It will be a seamless cross-cutting experience across your product lines, right? And I think that's one way of kind of thinking about like how products need to interact and how they become a whole system. But I think that same pattern, what I just described, this idea of like acquiring lots of products, that's what IT is, right? Like IT is that acquires lots of tools and nonsense, and then the developers have to go from one tool to another and figure out how to like configure them themselves, and they have to like re-explain themselves each individual tool, and it's a lot of overload for just wanting to be able to like create some simple function. And I think that's part of the problem with the platform, is that IT organizations need to reconsider that they're not holding companies. They don't hold a series of products and tools. they need to be a platform. They need to be a coherent pre-thought of interaction between a bunch of services that they provide. So that's like how I generally try to think about that a little bit, and I think it's a challenging thing to get through to people. But let's move. Let's forge forward. You're going to be at DDD, I believe. Yeah, I'm going to be at DDD, Europe. I'm excited about it. I'm teaching a workshop there on platform design. So I'm excited about that. What should people know about, like, what is DDD? Let's just start there. Like, what's the really quick definition of DDD?
Yeah, so this is a great one. So I tend to define domain-driven design as it's a pattern language, although Eric Evans never submitted that to the folks of the pattern languages, but it's a pattern language that allow us to reason about boundaries and allow us to reason about boundaries with our code, but also at a bigger level. Where our boundaries with domain. And this is what I usually, when I explain this to people in my workshops, these boundaries are made by us humans, so we can decide where we can put them. And people go very puzzled. Oh, they don't emerge, or are they there? Well, they can emerge if you have the right mechanics inside of the organization to allow them. But nevertheless, it's a decision. Where do you want to put this responsibility and accountability? In Mary's department or in Joe's department? It's a decision, right? And domain-driven design, it's about that. And started with Eric Evans, probably the book already probably almost 20 years ago, so probably 25 years ago, that he had problems actually working with firmware and to have these proper boundaries. And now to discuss the language with domain experts. And this is one of the first patterns and one of the most important ones, that is this ubiquitous language. Because software is code of intent. Compiler doesn't get about that string that we call a name. But getting back to our cognitive load, we care because we have these mental models and these concepts. And if the word there doesn't match, it's terrible. I had this. So the last job that I had before I had a big consultant, I was working in an e-commerce company here in Netherlands in the restocking domain. And a piece of the code talks about containers. And every time that I talk with domain experts, containers, and they were, but what are you talking about? Yeah, the containers and calculations is not about that, because containers, the city is in Rotterdam, the biggest port in the world. Port of Rotterdam handles containers. The concept is pallets. The code was doing what was supposed to do. The compiler doesn't care, but is this concept. And domain-driven design gives us this. Because you and you are domain expert, I'm software developer. We need to agree, what does this mean? And where put this boundary? What is in one, what is out? And especially, and this is really important, what does this model doesn't do? What is outside of the boundary? That we tend to forget. I usually give the people two maps. Mercator projection, the one that we learn in school. And ask what this is. Oh, this is the Mercator projection and blah, blah, blah. But what does this serve? And this serve because, Portuguese people want to travel around the equator. So from Lisbon to New York, it's accurate. But then someone remembers, well, let's measure the area of the land. Works pretty well with Portugal. It's accurate. South Africa, Greenland, miserable, right? Then we need the Peters projection. And this is the visual element that I give to people. You want to know the area, use these maps. You want to navigate across the equator, use these maps. Let's think about this. And domain-driven design is about these principles, right? And then I have lots of patterns, practices emerge inside of the community to discuss and to get these. But the companies that are able to put these practices and discuss this ubiquitous language are the companies that start to picking up proper speed. The example is microservices. The first book of Sam Newman, let's do microservices. The second book says, let's look to the bounded contexts that are the patterns, one of the patterns to put boundaries. Start with there before going with our technology choices. And I think that we tend to forget, and getting to these all holdings or all organizations, it's about these concepts. What do we want to provide? Yes, we can put lots of tools inside of this bounded context, but what is this interface? What is this experience that we want to get? Do we want to decrease the cognitive load of people or not? And this is what domain-driven design gets. And also is very useful to tackle complex problems. So the subtitle is Tackle Complexity in the Art of Software. If your domain is simple or complicated, applying domain-driven design on, full gonna be hard, but really shines with complex problems because things are very dynamic around us. And this is where the community has gone as an intersection of lots of disciplines to get this right. So, long story short, very good to discuss and reason about boundaries.
So how I have ideas about how to do platforms with this, but like, what do you think if you were talking to a team that was kind of responsible for maintaining, developing, however you want to think of, like they're the platform team to some extent. How would they use, how would they productively engage? Who would they productively engage in a DDD bounded context or ubiquitous language exercise? Like who are they interacting with? What are they discovering? How would these ideas be useful to people who are doing platforms?
So one of the things, assuming that they are, okay, we need to give an example to make this concrete. Do you want to choose the topic of this platform team?
Let's say it's a gaming platform. The backend that allows the interaction between the chat system and the trading system in a massively parallel online game.
All right. So it's a good one, right? So first of all is understanding what do you want to do. In this case, you talk about the integration about these two different models. The first thing is to map how this gonna work. And there are three big areas with domain-driven design. There are tactical patterns that are very good for the code. There are strategic patterns, that is, how can we organize ourselves? And although we went a bit to the teams, I think that team topologies covers better those patterns. And then the third one that emerged, and Paul Reiner coined, that is collaborative modeling, right? So it's pretty much picking up, and visually, for people that don't have impairments, can we visually map this out? For instance, using event storming, how these journeys goes, and what are the moments where the language changes, where this chat message becomes something else on our side that then goes to the trading system. What is this point, right? If we think about going to the cinema, you reserve a seat and you pay, and then this is a ticket. You don't have a ticket in the beginning. There is this pivotal moment where a new concept arises. And this is the very interesting thing, because in this case, you are talking about at least three systems at play, right? Three components at play. Is discovering these pivotal moments where this language changes, because when this language changes is a good heuristic to put a boundary, because it means that the behavior is going to be different.
Yeah.
Typically, we bunch these together and then becomes these big ball of mud that all of these concepts get together. And then when the company scales to this massive global scale, becomes very easy to operate software, becomes costly because you need beefy machines to cope with the load. Because even maybe the systems have different properties, right? The chat can be about, have the messages and distribute, send one message, distribute to lots of people. And the other ones is doing calculations on this naive example. How does this chain together, right? And domain-driven design gives us these techniques. You have event storming to start to explore and map these visually and start, okay, the boundary looks like this because the language changed, so we can encapsulate these. And then the other part is then, you cannot focus on everything as a company. There are some parts of your business called domains with domain-driven design that you're going to focus or not. There are also heuristics and visual methods to classify these. What is the complexity? For instance, if we use core domain charts, what is the complexity on this area, on these models versus the business relevance? And if we put on those two axes, we can start. The beautiful thing is that by doing this classification, we can start protecting and do cognitive engineering, because if it has high complexity and is business relevant, we have a mission for one team because this is differentiator, and this is, if it's not that complex or doesn't differentiate to the business, we might go with COTS or SaaS, or might the team have 2 or 3 of these components to balance out. So there are some heuristics there. So we go from exploring, and I know that you had a discussion a couple of years ago about problem space and solution space, that are the names with DDD. You go from exploring the problem to have, I really like the other name, that is the proposition. What is your proposition? How do you put these boundaries and go towards the code, right? And this is one of the examples of the folks doing platform engineering or building these platforms can use, where this language changes and where the behavior change. Okay, nice boundary here. Here is an interface for us.
Cool. Yeah. So we did this this exercise at DevOpsCon in London, and we're run it again in Berlin in June, and it's a whole day workshop, and we called it domain-driven DevOps. And so this is like how we were trying to think through how you would do platform design. So the argument, right, is like initially, DevOps, like the first DevOps days, the first kind of seed ideas of DevOps is just basically like developers and operators should talk to each other. And so developers should talk to operators so that they understand the implications of how they develop for their code in operation, so they become a better developer. Operators should learn about some of the ideas and techniques that developers are using so that they can use those things to operate the systems better, right? So that's the basic argument. And so that we kind of layer 2 things into that, right? One is the idea of a platform, and 2 is this idea of domain-driven design. And so, like, to my mind, usually domain-driven design is the domain expert is going to be an end user. So like if you were doing, I think the container example is a common example that Eric uses, right? So if you're domain-driven designing a container application, your domain experts are people who, put containers on boats, who load containers, those are the people that you're having these kind of domain-driven conversations with, right? Well, what if we said what if we took that idea and said that there are other important domain experts that are surprising if you take the view of DevOps, because there's 2 new domain experts that need to be talked about in relation to a platform. One is the domain expert of the operators. Like, in other words, the operators need to talk to the developers of the platform and say, like, this is how we think about operating a platform. This is what we need to be able to operate it more effectively, so that we end up with some sort of design where we get a ubiquitous language between the platform developers, the platform operators, right? So that there's some interaction there that is going to create an interface, kind of like in a hex architecture theory, that the operators can see, not just the consumers, right? And then the second one is a conversation between application developers or developers who consume the platform and developers who execute the platform or develop the platform. So there's another set of conversations about you are a developer that consumes the platform. You should be a domain expert in relationship to the platform. You should help me understand what the interface should be to you, what language we should use to talk about this stuff. So that in the end, like my kind of idea or theory or mental model about domain-driven design is that if a developer describes a problem with the platform to me, the language that they use to describe the platform should also be the language that the code uses inside of itself, so that I don't have to do all these mental mappings to figure out, what you're talking about in relationship to the code. They should fit together in a way that lowers that translation layer, that translation problem. So I thought it was really interesting when we did it with people for the first couple times, because you get these really interesting outcomes where people finally go, oh, this is what a platform, oh, that's what a platform is. It's not just like a CI/CD pipeline. It's not like it's a piece of software that someone has to build and maintain that is consumed and operated. Oh, like that's a platform. That's something different. And I think you can do it at the infrastructure layer too. Same thing. Like you can define some common terms, common components, interfaces, who operates it, who consumes it, all that kind of stuff. So I thought it was really interesting. How does that strike you, or is it interesting? Am I far off?
It is interesting, right? The thing with language is that the people that are using the platform can have different mental models. And actually there is a pattern, there is a set of patterns with domain-driven design, but there are two. You can be conformist. That is exactly what you said. Okay, there is this one-to-one match. But also you can have this translation layer in between, because yes, you're going to pay the price, but I really want to segregate the language. And this gives options, right? But the important part is this discussion. This discussion needs to happen, because if this discussion doesn't happen, what you're going to do is baking in assumptions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I really like the crossing that you are bringing, because lots of times, even the folks inside of a company, and here we are talking about global companies, right, building these platforms for hundreds of teams to use, don't have this conversation, just bake in assumptions, which is terrible, right? So I had a conversation recently with someone talking about a typical platform, and the folks were focusing on the how fast you could build and deploy. And actually, when they run a bit of cognitive load about the developers using the platform, they discovered that the problem was debugging in production. Yeah. So observability was the problem.
Yeah.
Because conversation didn't happen. They just, we just need to put, developers like to put things fast in production. So this really needs to be fast.
Yep.
Taking 2 seconds or 1 minute, they didn't care. Actually, it's the other problem.
Yeah.
And is this conversation, can we get same people on same room, physical or virtual? Can we initiate this language, right? Or the discussion, and then start grooming the language. Oh, actually, we are talking about same thing. If we're going to put this in on same boundary, now we need to agree on same concept, because a machine is brutal. It's just
that's right. Yeah.
And if it is a different concept, can we agree that are different things separate, and even can be inside of a platform 2, 3, or 4 bounded contexts, but then this is the contract that I have to the outside, and I'm going to honor this contract.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to use versions.
Yeah.
I am reliable. If it is above 500 milliseconds, I'm going to bail out. So I'm reliable that and then these are my SLOs and SLOs. These conversations don't happen enough. And I think that, bring this to forefront. One of these days, I'm going to join one of these workshops, because this needs to happen, to have this healthy relationship between the people that own the different components in the ecosystem, to really for the last people, the person outside consuming the service, to have an optimal experience, and at the same time, be cost effective and tackle the problem, whatever the problem means. But let's agree that this is the goal as a company that we have to tackle.
Yeah.
So using domain-driven designs from those lenses and techniques and practices, I think that going to enable people to have those conversations.
Yeah. So like the other thing that I think about with DDD, and I think it's interesting or points towards an evolution and the way that DevOps needs to evolve a little bit. And don't tell anybody at home, but I think that DDD has something to do with architecture, like that dirty word, architecting things. Designing cross-cutting concerns that last for a long time, making decisions that are hard to undo, and that doesn't mean that it's made by architects, right? Like architecture is a capability a firm has. It's not necessarily a role that a firm has. But having some sort of like design activity to think about how the software all fits together maybe is useful, and maybe has been, like the last 20 years, kind of degrading in most organizations. Like architecture, I usually describe like enterprise architecture is a functional extension of procurement into IT. It's just a group of people who are telling you what you can and can't buy. They're not actually architecting anything. So I think like one of the things about DDD in these platform perspectives, and from a DevOps perspective, it's like DevOps were like operators applying development theory to operations. I think this extends the conversation to operators and developers using architectural conversations to think about a platform that is more highly leveraged in theory, used by multiple application teams, full of cross-cutting concerns, observability platform, logging, like these are cross-cutting concerns. Our long-term investments often take a little while to stand up. All those things are like traditional architecture things, right? So like, I think this conversation about architecture, co-design, architecture is a capability of co-designing. I think those are all super interesting ways of kind of evolving DevOps and development and operations into this platform thing that's more vocal right now, at least. I mean, I think DevOps practitioners have been building platforms for a long time. I just don't know how much they've been architecting them. I think SREs architect platforms a lot, but I'm not sure how much architecture was going into the initial conceptions of platforms. But I don't know. Does that make sense to you, or?
It makes sense, right? We had this conversation a while ago, but this is the point, right? You are right. So architecture became a dirty word, right? Because people understand the agile commandments of don't do design, just run. Doesn't matter direction. And now we see all the companies falling down the cliff because, right, they were not looking to the science. We need to design, right? And we need to make these decisions. What I usually tell people is not like the upfront design of IBM during 2 years designing everything. No, it's having the practices to capture signals from the environment to keep adapting our software. Because once again, and I think I keep saying this to lots of people, I really like these artificial objects, right? Software is the first artificial object that can change shape in production very easily.
Yep.
Other artificial objects that we create, we need to destroy them and go through a lengthy process. Yep. If we have the right engineering approach, it's quite easy and fast to change this software in production.
Yeah.
And it's about that. It's about these companies that invest enough on these design capabilities with people, with teams. I think that stand longer and even don't need to, keep staffing lots of people if they keep understanding, maybe now we just acquire this software or use this SaaS solution because for this capability to serve inside of this platform, we don't need to custom make these. And those are then the architectural decisions. Going to change some of the interfaces, but if we design properly some of the interfaces and allow them to evolve, we can make these technology decisions and swap components and be transparent.
Yeah.
And no, we don't do enough. And I don't think that also is just for DevOps folks, even in software, that is where it's born, is not there yet.
Yeah.
Right? Lots of more people are discovering now, and we have these patterns that are simple and effective. Yes, for a long time. So I think that we go on this discovery journey getting there.
Yeah.
And I think that we need better skills. Going back to that developer experience platform, I think that from Shopify was pretty, was good. People design it properly. One of the exceptions in the world.
Yeah.
So bringing these designing principles, thinking about the utilities, what are the attributes that you want your system to have, are great conversation starters to then make the trade-offs, right? Because this is what I keep telling people. Software architecture is the game of trade-offs. So architecture in general, right? What is the thing that you want to put in the cost of another? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And then adapt.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to have you come back, and we'll have to talk about how to make platforms more evolvable and think through that. I don't want to take you for another hour. I would. We could talk forever, but I want to have you come back and talk about that again in the future. So Joao, if people were going to take like 3 ideas away, or 3 things that they could try, or 3 things that they should read or look at, what are 3 things out of this conversation you think people should pay attention to?
Yeah. So obvious one, read the Good Services book. Really nice advice. And although picks up on lots of complicated theories, the language, it's bang on.
Cool.
It's for people like me.
Yep.
The second one is something from the domain-driven design people. So you're going to see these when you come here to the Amsterdam. Make the implicit explicit.
Yeah.
If you are making an assumption in your design, call it an assumption, and then I'm going to experiment over this assumption, and I'm going to check the results. By using these results, we take this emotional charge that everything is certain. I really advise folks to think about this. Call out these implicit things that exist across your landscape, and then validate those. And the third one, going back to the domain-driven design community, use these collaboration methods to get this conversation on. It's the only way to get there. I did this mistake in the beginning of my career. These users are always changing their opinion. Yes, because the software that I did was great, that they discovered something to do. Collaborate, have these. I'm not saying collaborate all of the time, but getting the techniques that work for you, that can help you put closer to the goal of your company or your team or your community. So are the 3 things that I leave with people.
Cool. The last one is one of my favorite things to say to people. I sometimes say to people, like, you believe you're like going to change the world, right? Like you're designing something that will change the world, or at least change your organization, right? Like it's going to change something, right? If you're successful, you're going to change something. And they go, yeah. I was like, well, you should take that seriously, because if you're successful, it means that you'll have to design more, because you'll change the system that you injected the thing into. And so it won't be the same thing anymore. So you should definitely realize that if you're successful, you'll have to redesign the damn thing. And there's no way around it. If you're going to change the world, you're going to have to change what you inject into the world. The context has changed, right? And the thing I wanted to be clear about really quickly is when you were saying make things explicit, you were saying make it explicit if it's an assumption. You're not saying like drive things to absolute endpoint decision. You're saying like, note when something is an experiment, note when there's uncertainty around things, leave the uncertainty in the system. Don't attempt to extract it from the system prematurely. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're going to make assumptions, put a comment, write some document. We made an assumption here. We are putting in production. The expected behavior is A. We're going to measure like this, even if this is low fidelity. And show up, stand by your commitment.
Yeah.
Oh, we made the assumption was wrong. Cool, we learned something.
Yeah.
Is the system design and we have enough platforms to have a quick turnaround because our assumption was wrong?
Yep.
That is the pinnacle for software, right? For these software-powered systems.
Yep.
And this is what I'm making by this. Call these things out. It's okay. Unfortunately, right? We are trying to be governed by the laws of certainty.
Yep.
Just goes wrong.
Yep. I usually try to say to people like, learning is the delta between expectation and outcome, right? And so if you're not clear what your expectation is, you can have lots of outcomes and no learning because you're not sure what you expected to happen in the first place, right? It's not the point of having a hypothesis is not have a commitment to achieve the outcome of the hypothesis. It's to notice when you don't achieve it so that you learn something, right? I think that's kind of interesting.
Exactly.
Joao, how can people support your work? What's something that they can do? How can they find you? How can they engage with you?
Well, you can find me online, right? On LinkedIn with the handler that is on the screen. And the same one on the bird site with Twitter. And a similar one without the AS on Mastodon. You can visit my website, joaorosa.io. Just send me a message. I'm independent consultant around these, mostly about organizational design and this balance about the social part and the technical part. So contact me if you want to have a coffee or discuss this type of stuff. I'm in Europe, so working with these time zones. It's pretty much that.
Cool.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Thank you, Joao. It was great having you. I'm going to have you come back and we're going to talk about evolvability in the future of platforms. I really appreciate your input today. I'm sure the audience learned a lot. So thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Next time we do under 1 hour. One constraint.
Thanks, Joao.
Enjoy.